It happened at the most vulnerable time, 10 minutes before the third hour of the night, deep darkness over Novoscherkassk. Somewhere in the distance, a faint rumble could be heard, perhaps the wind playing in the wires, or maybe a freight train rushing across the horizon. However, the sector commanders responsible for this area were already long asleep. They were confident. Everything was under control. No signs of threat. Silence. But into this silence crept a real storm. Only 100 meters from the railway line, along which a strategically important cargo was about to pass, shadows lay hidden in the grass, their faces concealed, their breathing slowed. This was the Atesh group. People who, for several months, had step-by-step gathered information, obtained coordinates, checked schedules, and risked their lives for one single purpose: not to strike the train, but the very heart of logistics. Above the partisans' heads, almost silently, flew a drone, an American Switchblade of the 600 series. It did not attack the train directly. That would have been too simple and too foolish. A moving train is a difficult target. The risk would not justify the result. The target was the signaling system, a small concrete box nearly invisible unless one knew it controlled all train movement on this section. It was this system that told trains where to go, when to brake, where to stop. The Atesh group knew this route down to the last bolt. They knew the train carried 2,000 artillery shells to the front. They knew when it would depart, where it would be at a given moment. And most importantly, they knew about the dead zone in the Russian Nebo-M radar system, whose tilt of 3 6/10 degrees prevented it from detecting low-flying objects near the ground. This was the loophole, and they exploited it. But to bring the plan to completion, they needed not only technology, but psychological pressure. Weeks before the operation, Atesh agents began spreading rumors about a traitor within the Federal Security Service. This caused precisely the reaction they anticipated: fear, panic, distrust among their own, and in the end, night patrols were reduced by 50%. It was in this shadow that the Switchblade slipped through. At 2 hours and 51 minutes, the train entered the kill zone. In that instant, the drone, like a hawk with its beak clenched, dove down. Its target, a nondescript concrete hut by the rails. Within seconds, a charge weighing 34 pounds pierced the concrete and incinerated the electronics inside. A red light lit up on the driver's panel. The signaling went dead. Movement through an unlit section became impossible. Stop. Immediately. The screech of brakes could be heard kilometers away. A train massing 2,000 tons ground into the rails. It was halted, turned into a static target. Everything was going according to plan, and then things only became more interesting. The silence after the train stopped did not last long. Within moments, under layers of gravel and dirt along the tracks, came to life what had been planted earlier in the night: M18A1 mines. The partisans did not wait for orders from above. They had a plan drilled down to the second. A signal over the radio channel, and along the track erupted a true wall of steel and fire. Each mine released 700 steel balls, flying sideways at tremendous speed. But they did not just tear chunks out of the rails, they bent, twisted, and ripped the steel apart. The track, which was meant to carry many more trains, turned into metallic mush. This was no longer a railway. It was a monument to destruction. The train was stuck. Not for an hour, not for a day, but for a long time. But an explosion of that scale could not go unnoticed. 12 miles from the epicenter, the operator of the Nebo-M radar station struggled to stay awake. When the siren suddenly blared at full volume, he nearly dropped his cup of tea. On the screen, a clear signal. Something had happened. And that something demanded an immediate response. At 2 hours and 54 minutes, by command, a Panzer S-1 air defense battery was activated. Its radars, equipped with a full-circle scan, began combing the sky. But Ukraine was ready, very ready. Slightly higher, at 3 different points, 3 Bayraktar TB2 drones simultaneously entered the Panzer's field of view. They behaved loudly, predictably, as if deliberately showing themselves on the radars. Their task was simple: to be targets. The Russian crews did not hesitate. On the signal, a series of 3 P-57E6 rockets was launched. Each cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the sky tore with flashes. One by one, all 3 Bayraktars were destroyed. Russian operators rejoiced. 3 targets, 3 hits. Everything was under control. Or was it? While attention was fixed on these bright decoys, from the opposite direction a 4th target appeared, this time almost invisible. It was a modified Orlan team, a Russian drone captured earlier and reconfigured by Ukrainian engineers. It flew on its own, without a link, without radio control. It did not heed commands. It followed a preloaded route using inertial navigation and terrain matching. It could not be jammed. It did not listen. And it had one task: to shout. It began broadcasting a strong signal identical to that emitted by a Ukrainian strike UAV. For the Panzer system, this was a true prize. Radar has acquired a target, the operator reported. The next moment, a volley. 6 rockets were sent on their way, only they flew not to where the drone was. They flew to where the signal had been transmitted from, and from there, it was not a field at all. It was a Russian ammunition depot. The rockets, designed to engage aerial targets, slammed into the storage bunkers holding 15,000 pounds of artillery shells. The consequences were catastrophic. The explosion, in a fraction of a second, turned the depot area into a lake of fire. Flames shot into the sky, illuminating the darkness for hundreds of meters around. The roar was heard even in Rostov. This was no longer just an operation. It was a public humiliation. The Russian air defense system had destroyed its own strategic asset, and all thanks to a deception that worked perfectly. But it did not end there. With each passing minute, the pressure mounted. The next step would be even bolder. Signals from the blown depot were not only registered by radars, they provoked real fury. This was no longer a systemic threat. It was a slap in the face. And the response was swift. From the nearest military base, a Mi-8 helicopter rose into the air. It was not automated. It was a hunter. And its target was not equipment, but people. It took off to intercept, armed with air-to-surface guided missiles. In its sights, revenge. The thermal imager on board instantly picked up several points on the ground. These were not machines. They were bodies. The heat from their electronics had not yet dissipated. This was the Atesh group. Positions were revealed. There were no more maneuvers, only escape. At an altitude of 5 miles, the helicopter operator received permission to launch a Vickers missile. Its speed, almost twice the speed of sound. 14 seconds. That was exactly how much time the partisans had to find a way out. And they found it. The commander carried in his rucksack the last hope. A primitive, homemade device. A radio frequency jammer assembled literally from a battery, an antenna, and a pair of wires. Its task was to create chaos. It did not block the signal like a high-tech suppressor. It simply flooded the required band with noise so dense that the missile lost its bearings. After 9 seconds of flight, the missile entered the jamming zone. Its guidance system began to float. On the screen, interference. No clean signal. One more moment, and the missile veered off course. It did not merely miss, it self-destructed, crashing into an empty field, a flash, a shock wave, but the target lived. The helicopter operator raged, but he had no more missiles. Ukraine, however, still had one ace left. A few kilometers from the bridge connecting Novocherkassk with the front, a second team emerged from cover. They had no heavy equipment, no satellite link, but they had 20 FPV drones, each with a charge of 2 pounds of plastic explosive. The drones were launched almost simultaneously. Each operator donned a VR headset and took manual control. The connection was via fiber optic cable. That meant no radio jamming, no laser could stop them. The drones moved toward the bridge at an altitude of a few meters, fast, maneuverable, almost like flies. The Mi-8's radar noticed them, but it no longer mattered. 20 targets, small, fast, low. It could not do anything in time. The first strike, under one of the supports, then the second, the third. The charges were small, but coordination and precision did their work. Each explosive hit precisely the vulnerable points of the structure, explosion after explosion. The sounds resembled a jackhammer at work, only this was a jackhammer at a military scale. The bridge began to shudder. Metal screeched, concrete cracked, a strange low hum, and then everything. The central part of the structure could not hold. With a roar, it collapsed into the river, carrying rails, supports, and strategic value with it. No more trains would pass here. The bridge was destroyed. The helicopter could no longer help. Its target had been destroyed not by a shot, but by engineering. It turned away, departed. And the Atesh group, meanwhile, did what they did best: vanished. Not in flight, not in panic, but along a pre-planned route, in shadow, in silence. They had done everything they had planned. Now all that remained was to watch the consequences unfold, but the bridge explosion and the depot fire were only the outward effect. The true force of the strike manifested a little later. Everything that happened that night was calculated not only for destruction. The main blow was struck at logistics, and therefore at the very organism of the army. A few hours after the operation, chaos began in the rear headquarters. The first problem was transport. The train loaded with 2,000 shells stood still. Behind it were 3 more trains. They were all blocked, like beads on a string that had suddenly been cut. Next, the bridge. Now it was impossible to move a single carriage with ammunition to the southern direction. 60% of all shells and rockets destined for the Zaporizhia and Kherson fronts were stuck. The flow did not slow down. It stopped completely. The second problem was artillery. Hundreds of guns that were supposed to fire almost continuously suddenly fell silent. The guns existed, but there were no shells. And when heavy artillery is silent, the front begins to crumble. During those critical hours, Ukrainian forces managed to advance more than 3.5 miles, without loud assaults, simply exploiting the fact that the enemy had been deprived of its main power. But perhaps the most terrible thing for the Russian command was not even that. The most dangerous consequence was the undermining of trust within their own system. Rumors of moles in the Federal Security Service, which the partisans so skillfully spread, blossomed wildly. Generals suspected one another. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Instead of seeking solutions, commanders hunted traitors. For 72 hours straight, the Southern Command was effectively paralyzed. Official reports, of course, called everything that happened a temporary logistics failure. But satellite images told a different story. From above, it was visible. Where a bridge had once stood yawned a 30-foot chasm. Where rails had run remained nothing but twisted steel, and where the ammunition depot had been was now a crater and a heap of ash. This is how 20 people, several drones, and a carefully planned operation turned a multi-billion-dollar military infrastructure into a pile of rubble. But the main lesson from this story is simple. Modern war is not a contest of who has more expensive or more powerful hardware. It is a battle of minds. Those who can exploit the enemy's weaknesses, even the smallest ones, win far more than those who spend billions on metal. And now a question for you. If you were in charge of this operation and had resources for one more strike, where would you hit? At the fuel depot to stop vehicle movements, or at the radar complex to leave an entire region undefended? Write your opinion. It matters.